We explained yesterday from the Maral the basic significance of Hellenism in its good aspects and evil aspects from the Maral. Now we are fortunate that there's an excellent development and commentary on the significance of Chanukah and Hellenism, and also the four empires that we refer to in a volume called the Mitzvah Canon. That we had in the early years of yeshiva students, who became quite an expert in the writings of the Maral. And he expounded and developed these concepts in a remarkable manner, being guided also by Rav Ari Kama, who was the major disciple of the Tesla, and that Tesla in turn, he took a lot of his development in describing deeper aspects of the Midrashim Haggadot on the writings of the Maral of Prague, as we mentioned yesterday. So he was called Rav Shlomo Malin. Get the name right.
Okay.
Yeah. And we've got an edition from 93. Maybe there's even a later edition. It's very worthwhile to have as a deep exposition of the concept of Maral. So we were holding at the point in his exposition of the four empires, and in his description of the significance of the negative aspects of Hellenism, which darkened the light of the world. Although we know Hellenism is generally regarded as the movement that has brought an intellectual enlightenment, but when we compare it, contrast it with the significance of the people of Israel, he says there are two aspects that mark off the opposition of the Hellenists. One was the concept of an absolute spiritual God. They in turn regarded man as the measure of all things, and also representation of the human instincts, made a god of the beauty and a god of war, and also a physical image of other gods. And in this, although Alexander the Great recognized the superiority of the Torah to Greek wisdom, but his successors, especially the Seleucids, they pursued the concept, pursuit of pleasure, pursuit of the beauty also of human form, and the pleasure, development of the body and the sports. And therefore then they found the opposition of the Asmoneans, the Maccabeans. It's quite ironical that Maccabeans, who battled against the sports stadiums of the Hellenists, but the idolization of sports in Israel is under the name of the Maccabeah. In any case, the heroism of the Maccabeans was Micha Mocha Be'elam Hashem, but the exact opposite. That Hashem, He is the only true spiritual God. So they oppose the concept of the absolute intelligence of God, the absolute mind of the universe. So they oppose the transcendental, Seichel Hanivdal, of God Himself. And He's given a perception of this absolute mind of the universe into the divine image given to the human being. And the other aspect which they oppose very strongly is they contaminated the Holy Temple. Where they said, what do you mean? Making one spot in the world where there's no idol and there's worship. This is putting God into this world, because the Beit HaMikdash and its service represents how we have to bring godliness into human instincts and into avodah, into the service of God through all the mitzvot. That's they oppose the Beit HaMikdash. And it says these two concepts are referred to when we say the prayer, Yiratzon Milfonecho, Hashem Elokeinu. We hope and pray when we say over aspects of the service of the temple, may the temple be built soon and give us our portion in your Torah. He says this concept is explained in a different place of his books, and we're about to understand this more deeply from his interpretation of the four empires, as they hinted at in the first vision, prophetic vision, in more detail, mentioned the Chumash in chapter 15 of Genesis, where there is the vision given to our forefather Avram concerning what might happen in human history, the relationship in his descendants and the great empires of the world, the superpowers. So I want to already put in an aspect which perhaps the Maharal himself did not yet experience, but which we're experiencing today. That the concept of the Temple Mount, has always been understood by all generations as having to do with Kedah, finding Yitzchak, and the mention of this place, Yerushalayim, Zion, the names are given to it in the Tanakh, to do with the history of the Jewish people. And even our enemies, who didn't want the Jewish people to exist, but they knew the strength of the people lies in the temple, and they were not really interested in the temple. And we know the nations of the world even destroyed the temple. Why? Because the temple means that the ladder placed on earth, its head reaches into heaven. The temple is the external, physical transformation of the mind of the universe, which is above the mind of man, but to be followed in the actions of human beings, ultimately all the nations of the world. And therefore, Christianity regarded temples as being important. Because after all, so there's a new covenant, according to them, replacement theology, but they're also looking forward to the time when the temple will be built by a person who some of them consider as the Messiah, and others consider as a part of God Himself. It comes from their misinterpretation of what's written clearly in the prophets and hinted at in the Chumash, in the Pentateuch. And they distorted different ways, different groups of Christians. When Islam started, they knew that Jerusalem is a place for the Jewish people. And they said their prophet has moved divine revelation away from Jerusalem to Mecca and Medina. But in recent times, they also give priority to Jerusalem. Having built a mosque in the place of the temple, they say that's the future of the world. It's Islam. It's also a distortion in many different ways. But it's quite interesting that this really comes, this opposition to the temple comes through the influence of Hellenism. Because Alexander the Great recognized the superiority of the temple. And it's well known, even before his time, Jeremiah, when he was sitting near the ruins of the first temple, who came to visit him? Plato, according to an ancient tradition. And Plato, he put forward a lot of his ideas and questions to Yirmiyahu, and Yirmiyahu answered all his questions. After he'd answered all his philosophical questions, and he saw the superiority of Jeremiah over Plato, this is early, much earlier generations of Alexander the Great. So he said to him, I can see you're such a wise man. You can answer all these questions which we debate constantly in Athens, and you seem to have the answers. That's one question. Where do you get your wisdom from? And since you're such a wise man, why are you crying? A philosopher does not cry over spilt milk, to use a British idiom. No use crying over spilt milk. The temple was destroyed after just wooden stones. What is it we were crying here? So Jeremiah said, I'm answering with one answer both your questions. You know why I'm crying? Because any wisdom that I have comes from this building. The building is not just wooden stones. The building of which was the presence of the divine Shekhinah is now being destroyed. Divine Shekhinah is no longer resting there in the same manner as it did when the Beit HaMikdash still stood in the fullness of its service. Why? Because Beit HaMikdash is the way to bring God into this world. Not that even when you believe in the absolute God, mind of the universe, but it's beyond the mind of man, beyond beyond our universe, beyond certainly our globe, and beyond any place. And yet he has brought his divine presence to make a link with the earthly world. It's really the dream of Yaakov. Surah Mutzav Arza, on the ground, as you said, the world of action, but its head reaches into heaven. It's a link. We keep up the link through the Beit HaMikdash. That's its great power. So therefore, what's happening today is ultimately the changeover in Islam from a limited Islam outlook to a worldwide outlook. And they know also that the place of holiness, they've come to that conviction, established, they want to say it's not even established by the Jewish people, but they're just replacing it, and they're saying this is now the center, and we have to become a world power by controlling this place. Now this is hinted at already in the Akedah, because it says Akedah Yitzchak, which already explained, represents the ashes of Yitzchak, who was not burnt, who was not offered up. Instead of that, they offered up a ram. But the ram is in the place of Yitzchak. And the ash of Yitzchak is really the Holocaust. And the attempt of the Muslim world to apply the Holocaust to the whole Jewish people entirely, everywhere where they are, in different ways. It's the extension of Edom. The Nazis absorbed with the wildness of Ishmael, and that wildness of Ishmael replaces Yitzchak in their history, in their outlook, and they say the Jews are threatening it. The Jews want to, whenever a Jew goes onto the Temple Mount, they say the Jews are threatening their whole religion, which now finds its center, Mesos Kol Haaretz, as referred to by David HaMelech, in the Beit HaMikdash. But they say, we have to take it over. So in a certain way, these two aspects, to regard God as the Absolute One, and they also, in principle, regard God as the Absolute One, but they say, we have to take over everything, not the Jews. So therefore, this is the way in which this is applied in our own time. Now, to understand this passage more deeply, I'd like you all to turn, I've given you out the pages here, to the other page, which is from the other works, where this is what, in the work of Burat Hashem, which is really a description of the suffering in Egypt, followed by the redemption, and the suffering of the people of Israel at the hands of other superpowers until the redemption. So he's referring to the first vision of what's going to happen to the world, the relationship in Israel and the nations of the world. That was given to Abraham because Abraham was to become the progenitor of the people of Hashem. However, he would, in the end, be the teacher and the guide for all human beings. And that's described in the Brit Bein HaBetarim, the covenant which Hashem made with him between the pieces. Which pieces? The pieces of different animals that were cut up into pieces. So, and there was a path made between the cut up pieces. V'hinei, it says, what happened? It says in the Chumash, when this happened, so the symbolism is like this. It says in chapter 15 of Genesis, verse 12, when the sun set and the slumber fell upon Avram, and behold, fear, darkness, which was very great, fell upon him. Hashem said to Avram, you should know, your descendants are going to be strangers in the land which is not theirs. They will enslave them and persecute them. Then it said, verse 14, also the nation which will enslave you will I judge, and afterwards they will go out with great possessions. But you will come to your forefathers in peace, be buried in a good old age. Then it says, behold, there was a great mist, and in the great mist, the smoking oven and the pillar of fire passed between these pieces. On that day, Hashem made a covenant with Avram, saying, to your seed will I give this land, from the Nile to the big river of Euphrates. Then mentions 10 nations. And Rashi says that the 10 nations were given over to the descendants of Abraham will only happen at the time of the redemption. Until then, the descendants of Abraham, people of Israel, will inherit 7 nations. So there's discussion in the Midrash. What's the significance of the smoking oven and the pillar of fire? So I'll give you here this is from the Sefer Gvurot Hashem, which is referred to in the notes here. You've got it in front of you. Gvurot Hashem, page Nun Aleph. We're going to start paraphrasing and then explaining it. In the middle of the second column. We know, before it says, Chashecha, darkness, is a reference to Greek civilization, which after Alexander the Great, they divided into 2 parts. The Ptolemies were much more tolerant. One of the kings, Ptolemy, whose center was in Alexandria, he built the largest library in the Middle East in ancient times, collected together manuscripts, and he also was the one to arrange for 72 elders, people of Israel, to translate the Hebrew Tanakh into Greek. And that's why the Jewish community in Alexandria, many of them who were more assimilated, they used to read the Torah in Greek. And they still kept all the mitzvot. But like happens today as well, many people all over the world, they don't know Hebrew, but they do read the Bible in English. They have services in English. We know one of the great Jewish philosophers, Philo, was a great expert in Greek philosophy and a great expert also in Torah. He developed type synopsis. But the sages say the Seleucids, the other group, following the death of Alexander the Great, they understood we've got to destroy the Jewish faith. We don't really have to destroy the Jews in the body. Their main attempt was to try and convert all the Jews to become Hellenists, to participate in sports, to give up their faith, to stop these dividing aspects of Kashrus. So Malchut Yavan, they want to destroy the power of Torah from the people of Israel. That's why they made decrees against the Torah. And the Torah is the light. Kineh mitzvah v'Torah or, it says. The true light, the lamps are the mitzvot, and the Torah is the universal light. So, anyway, the whole verse refers to the 4 empires who will persecute the people of Israel. As it says, when the sun was setting and darkness began, behold, the smoking oven and a pillar of fire passed between these pieces. So the Midrashim say that he was shown in one hand Gehenna, hell, and he was also shown not hell after death, but hell on earth, which were the superpowers persecuting the people of Israel. He was shown the future. He was also shown the opposites. He was shown the giving of the Torah and the Beit HaMikdash. And Abraham was told, if your descendants will busy themselves with learning Torah and the sincere, proper worship of Hashem in the Beit HaMikdash, then be saved from the Gehinnom, hell after this life, and they'll also be saved from the hell on this earth, the superpowers, who make massacres, destroy the Jews. So Hashem asked Avram, what do you want? Which one do you want to choose for your descendants? You want your descendants, what's better? That they get the punishment, those who aren't good, those who are not following everything. If they follow everything, we just said, then they won't have Gehinnom, they'll have Gan Eden after death, and they'll be freed from enslavement to the superpowers. But what happens to those who aren't good? What's better for you? Better they should have hell after death, or better, no hell after death, but have terrible sufferings, killings and tortures in this world. What do you prefer? What would you say? Which one is better? We don't want either of them, of course. We want to dedicate ourselves to Torah and Beit HaMikdash. But let's say, what do you think is better for those, unfortunately, called the wicked amongst Am Yisrael? Which does not necessarily mean wicked in our eyes, wicked in the eyes of Hashem. It's a big difference. Hashem takes into consideration a person's background. But a person's got to have the punishment, which is better? Torture in this world or hell after?
Punished in this world.
Better.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what do you say? All agree? Anyway, Avraham said, yeah, better. Avraham said, better have Shibud Malchut. In other words, it turns out the Tanu Ashan, the Lapid Eish. So, of course, there's different ways of explaining which is reference to hell, which is reference to torture in this world. But it would appear that some of them say, Tanu Ashan, smoking oven, they're getting Jews to be burnt up. In fact, when it says by Haman, his attempt to annihilate the Jewish people, he said three expressions are used for his manifesto. He says, "Lahashmid harogo li'abed." I mean, these words are used interchangeably, but if they're used together, they have a slightly different nuance. Lahashmid means to take away their spiritual life, their religion, shmad. It's called Shem Yashmid, we say. That's what we call shmad. Say it's a shmad, religious persecution. Take away their religion. Larok means to kill them, to massacre them, get rid of them that way. So what's Ula'abed? To cause them to be destroyed. What is it? It's to burn them up, crematorium. So he says that is part of it. He says, see, in the korbanot that she brought, the animals that were cut up, these were the animals that are used for offerings in the Beit HaMikdash, which is really Torah. So he showed them the Beit HaMikdash. So he says, as long as your descendants busy themselves with Torah and Beit HaMikdash, they'll be saved both from the Tanu Ashan as well as from the Lapid Eish. Saved from both. So, look, before I come to the Maral's interpretation, he couldn't have experienced it yet, but with regard to prophecies, so there are very many expressions which nearly all the commentators, Midrashim, regard as symbols. But as we go along, what's happening in the world, they become literal. So really the simple interpretation of Tanu Ashan is the symbol of the total destruction of the Jewish people, which the power of Edom, absorbing also Yavan, were able to apply to a third of our nation with the Holocaust. Because they burnt them up. They put them in gas chambers, then they burnt up the bodies. That's the Tanur Rashan. But now the Maral is typical fashion. He says the two aspects of inner life, of Ikar Adam, the essence of the human being, the inner essence, is made up, we will call it today, the brain and the heart, the mind and the emotions, from which there is, from the heart, that the life power is given by the heart pumping, it's given life power to the human being, and also even to the physical aspects of the brain. But the real higher level is the mind. But the mind of the human being rests in the physical receptacle. And Beit HaMikdash and the Torah, this is what's called the Ikar Metzius of the world. So just as the heart is in the middle of the body of the human being, and from the heart you get the circulation of the blood to all the limbs, and also all emotions are recorded in the heart in different ways. Even person gets great shame, then his face goes white or it goes red. He has anger, his face goes red. It's all from the blood. The blood circulation comes from the heart. You see, the heart is receptible through its connection with pumping the blood. Therefore, it's that which gives life power to the human being and all his emotions and his instincts. But the higher part of man is in the higher intelligence. Just mentioned by the side, I saw that last week in a major investigation into what happens when people pray. Today you can assess the higher parts of the brain when they become activated. It gives a person a far higher pleasure than the fulfillment of the instincts. So they made a scale, they measured it. They saw that when a person prays, he lifts up all his energy to a higher, more spiritual level. And therefore increases then his power of intelligence also. It says here, so the brain and the heart correspond in the world. Beit HaMikdash is like the heart of the world, with all lands. They get their life power from Beit HaMikdash, and just like the brain, the mind is in the brain of man, it means the brain itself, physical brain, is the kali, the receptacle for high intelligence. So also the Torah is really the high intelligence which exists in the whole world. So there we see the Torah and the Beit HaMikdash are the ultimate reality, which is the spiritual one. And these two always come together. The Beit HaMikdash is on the earth and represents the perfection of the physical world. And the Torah is transcendental, it's in the higher levels of the mind, which is really beyond everything material. But this is why we say, Yaton, Nefanecha Sheboneh Beit HaMikdash V'meinu V'yomeinu V'sein Chelkeinu V'zayros Yechu, which means may the Beit HaMikdash be built soon nowadays and give us our portion in your Torah. In other words, please give us our portion, each person's portion, in that which is considered Metziut Davka, V'lo B'dvarim B'telim. It should be true reality and not things that become nullified. When we think today with Dvarim B'telim means a person is dealing with with useless trivialities. But really what it means, in a deeper way, there may be things, davarim, important ideas, important practices, important news, but these are all things that pass, that are not permanent. The davar batel become nullified. It's very transient. But the higher aspect of the human being exists in his highest thoughts and highest experiences, which do not become nullified. It's an entry into eternity. And since these two aspects, the two powers of the Torah and Beit HaMikdash, when Am Yisrael are busy with both of them, then they're also saved from the nations of the world, from their tortures, their massacres, and also from Gehinnom. Because the nations of the world who just follow trivialities, and their ambitions are power and pleasure, but not anything which has real eternal significance, and for them, Gehinnom also, it's not a reality. Because it says on the nations, Kol Goyim Tohu. The nations, the way they're living, is just something which is empty. And how much more so Gehinnom, which is darkness. And that is a clear significance. Because Paul says to Avram, you choose one of them. Your descendants will, if they're not careful, they'll lose their eternity, either through the superpowers who will destroy them, or through Gehinnom. Because just as the Gehinnom is really just destruction, so also the superpowers become destroyed, and Israel will be destroyed with them. So therefore, Medrash said, Avraham, he chose Malchiot. Because it says, superpowers will have an end. But Gehinnom, who knows when that will end? So, so the Maral connects this with the suffering of Am Yisrael through the Hellenists. They wanted to destroy the Beit HaMikdash, or make it, you not destroy it, they said. Better still, we'll contaminate it, put idols in the temple. And to desecrate its holiness, and at the same time also to torture people of Israel if they study Torah. So you have any questions on this? Or comments? Yeah. We'll see you tomorrow.